Hey, church. So, continuing on to provide you, hopefully, with a daily dose of hope in the middle of all the other things we're consuming right now from a media, from a watching, from a listening standpoint. And I've gotten a ton of feedback from you guys on this, which is so encouraging because it's helpful just to know that it's not just my mother watching. I made my mother-in-law too. Wanted to keep sending this stuff out. And I was thinking about today, just something I wanted to share with you in regards to suffering and what do we do when we are going through times of hardship. And I recognize even saying that there's a whole spectrum of hardship or difficulty that maybe you are dealing with. And I know just in talking with some of you, this has affected you firsthand in terms of loss of job, in terms of reduction of wages, in terms of just uncertainty of whether that's coming. For some of you as students, you know how this has affected your schooling and what's going on now, what's next for you, and that's really difficult. For some of you, loved ones that you're worried about that were sick with something else, who now, like hospital visits and things like that, are now all so much more complicated. For those of you that have lost loved ones through this, and we know of at least one person in our congregation who has. And so there's a spectrum of suffering, and maybe you say, you know what, it hasn't actually affected me too much other than I'm stuck at home, but I'm trying to care for those who would have. And so, yeah, the question is, how do we handle that? I was listening to an audiobook called The Good and Beautiful God by a guy named James Bryan Smith. He's actually written a trilogy. The first one in it is called The Good and Beautiful God, and would highly recommend it. But he said, he was talking about how actually going through an experience where he and his wife, where they lost a child at a very young age, and what a heartbreaking, excruciating, painful experience that was in their lives, obviously, and still is to some degree many years later. But he said one of the things he wrestled with during that time is knowing that Jesus himself suffered immensely. And we're in a season of Lent, reflecting on the sufferings of Jesus. And, one of the pictures of the suffering of Jesus is even in the garden, where he is asking God if this can be over, if he can get relief from this suffering. And so I think obviously we can ask God for relief. And I've been praying for healing. I've been praying for God to turn the tide on this virus, to flatten the curve in a dramatic way, in a divine kind of intervention way. So Jesus is suffering in the garden, praying that he wouldn't have to go through this, and suffering in a way that he's feeling the weight of this. But he said at the end of that prayer, Jesus says to God, his Father, okay, not what my will, but yours, in this kind of posture of trust. And if you read the account, actually, it's an agonizing thing. I think it's in Matthew 26, near the end of the gospel accounts in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And he's suffering and feeling the weight of this and agonizing and crying out, and then comes to this point of just, quiet surrender. And Smith made the observation, he said, how did Jesus get to that point to be able to actually say to God, okay, I trust you no matter what? And he made the point that on the role that the awareness of blessing in our lives plays in being able to trust God. He said Jesus had cultivated throughout his life an awareness of his good Father, like just how good God was and the blessings. And you can see that kind of all the way through his teachings. And he calls God Abba, which is this term of affection and endearment. It means father, daddy, really, which is a term of like not just affection and closeness, but trust, right? And so he's saying Jesus is calling God Abba and is living in this place where he trusts his good Father, because he has cultivated on an ongoing basis throughout his life this trust relationship in who his Father God is. And he said, the reality is, and he said, I began to realize I am so unaware of the vast amount of blessings that I have in my life. And he pointed to this exercise that someone did many years ago where they held up a white sheet of paper with a black dot in the middle of it in front of a room full of people. And they said, "What do you see?" And of course, everybody says, "Well, I see the black dot." And he said, "Okay, this may seem, simplistic, but he said, in many ways, that is how we see our lives. We are aware of the pieces of the suffering, but we are unaware of actually what's behind it." He said, nobody says, "I see a white sheet. I see a vast amount of white." And he just said, like, that's the, he said, I think sometimes, oh, what I need, how come God isn't providing me enough money? And if I had $1 million, that would make me better. But he said, I also have my eyesight. And if I didn't have my eyesight, but I had $1 million, I would give up the $1 million to get my eyesight. And just simply to say, like, there's all these blessings I have that I don't even think about and I take for granted. And he wasn't saying that to sort of shame himself or shame us and saying, you should be grateful, look at all the good things, don't focus on the bad things. He wasn't saying that. Here's what he was saying. He's saying when we are able to reflect on the goodness of God in our lives on a daily basis and all of the things we have and realize these are all blessings from God. These are all signs of the goodness of God. He said, when we are able to do that on a daily basis, ongoing basis, what is building up in our hearts is trust. Trust in the goodness of God. And actually, if you look back at the human story, the heart or the core idea of sin, if you want to think about it this way, is a lack of trust, right? Is human beings saying, God, we don't trust you, we trust ourselves. So, cultivating ongoing trust in the goodness of God because we are cultivating an ongoing awareness of the goodness of God all around us and all the blessings builds up trust in our lives in him, so that when we find ourselves thrust upon the precipice of a cliff that we may go over, that we are being pushed over, that we're in free fall, right? Wherever you may happen to be. Some of you may be staring at the cliff saying, what if I lose my job? What if I can't graduate? What if whatever? Others of you may saying, I'm in free fall. When those things happen, Jesus in the garden, in that moment when the threat of death and arrest, and he knew it was coming, was thrust upon him, he didn't suddenly try to trust God. What was in him over many years of walking with his Abba Father God was this trust, this deep trust in who God is. That then in the moments when he couldn't see the white and when he couldn't see the blessings and all he saw was the darkness, he was able to trust. And it just made me think, man, okay, that's why we cultivate gratitude. That's why we become aware. Not because God needs us to acknowledge. He's like, hey, you haven't thanked me for that today. I mean, we're like that, right? I'm like that with my kids. Like, hey, did you notice like the stuff? But God's not insecure like that, like me. He doesn't need that. So we don't thank him because he needs it. It's like the air that God breathes is our praises or something like that. He doesn't need that. We need it. And as we do it on a regular basis, as we reflect on the goodness of God in so many ways, as we see the vastness of his blessings throughout our lives, it builds up this trust in our Abba Father God that when darkness, doubt, fear, calamity is thrust upon us or we are thrust upon it, what has been built up, the foundation that's already there is trust in the goodness of God. And we say, okay, that's one of the songs that we've been singing over the last year that I just love every time. It's so simple, right? All my life, you have been faithful. All my life, you have been so, so good. With every breath that I'm able, I will sing of the goodness of God. That doesn't mean everything that's going on is great. What it means is I have been seeing, I am choosing to cultivate the blessings, the awareness of all of your goodness so that when I am in crisis, so that when I don't see blessing in front of me, when it feels like cursing or when it feels like just darkness, when it feels like you're not coming through, when it feels like I don't know how much more I can handle, what has been built up and strengthened, the foundation of my life is trust in who God is. So I want to encourage you to just do that even today. But even more specifically, I want to encourage you to join us tonight online through Zoom, and you'll be getting an email, or you've already gotten an email about this in our prayer time. It's one of the things we're going to do just to in the early part of our prayer time is just give you time to do that. So you can't do it enough. But there's a spoiler alert. That's one of the things we're going to be doing at the prayer night tonight. So I just want to encourage you to be there, to get online, to join it, to be a part of it, to be part of our community and just feel like we're not alone and that we're praying together. And for some of you for whom, public prayer, communal prayer is kind of scary, this is the perfect way to be a voyeur, right? You just log on and just watch and listen, but also encourage you to participate through the chat and all that kind of stuff. So I'll leave that with you. God bless. Hope this is a good daily dose of hope for you. And by all means, as I said, feel free to forward to anybody that you think is in need of some hope right now. God bless.